Welcome to Produce Talks.
This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. This episode, we dive deep into the vast conversation on sustainable packaging. Ensuring food quality, sustaining food availability, reducing waste, minimizing costs to consumers, and maximizing recyclability, all while mitigating the impacts on the environment. All these factors at play make the discussions and strategies around packaging and preferred packaging materials remarkably complex. On this episode, guests talk about their work in the area of sustainable packaging and highlight the need for continued collaboration and communication across the supply chain to make the most sound and informed sustainable packaging decisions. We were joined by Dan Duguay of Tactix Government Relations and Public Affairs, Ian Gordon, Senior Vice President of Loblaw Brands, Emily Murracas and Fernanda Albuquerque from Mucci Farms, and Scott Howarth from Sinclair International.
Our first guest is Dan Duguay, Managing Principal at Tactix Government Relations and Public Affairs. Welcome, Dan.
Good morning.
So, Dan, this episode is going to focus on sustainable packaging, which in our industry, as I'm sure you know now, is a pretty hefty topic. And to help set the stage for that conversation, I want to start off by talking about the CPMA Plastics Packaging Working Group, which you've been supporting since its inception last summer. Can you start off by providing an update on the work of the Plastics Packaging Working Group over the last couple months?
Yeah, for sure. So as you know, the working group's been quite active since it was launched in the summer of 2019. Leading, I think, the first big milestone was the release of the roadmap in December 2019, which was well received. Definitely positioned the CPMA at the forefront of associations, in my view, across Canada. It was seeking to respond more proactively to the increased concern around plastic pollution. More recently, the work has moved to the development of a strategy, more specifically, obviously informed by the roadmap, with subgroups focused on standards, education, etc., and also looking at key elements of the strategy in terms of information to guide decision-making, some standards which can help shape the industry, and education towards industry members, stakeholders, and citizens. Admittedly, COVID-19 has changed everything, or more so delayed a lot of things. So the focus, obviously, by members, the working group members, has been more tactical in terms of the safety of their employees and consumers, obviously focusing on mitigating supply chain impacts, and also, mitigating impacts and the financial viability of the many stakeholders, players along the supply chain, from growers to retailers. So consequently, the work of the working group has shifted to focus on the tools that will help members make decisions regarding packaging, with the strategy still being relevant, but more likely to come together in the later part of 2020.
It sounds like we're at a stage where, it's about developing educational resources for industry.
Although there's value in a strategy document in terms of providing guiding principles and the like, I think what members are seeing now, given the current COVID context notwithstanding, is the importance of decision-making tools, so that they can start to make more sort of evidence-informed decisions regarding packaging, all of which was going to be part of the strategy work anyways. It's just that right now the tools are seen by many of the members as sort of important, needed in the near term.
And so our first resource or tool coming out, I've seen the draft of it at least, is the Preferred Plastics Guide.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Preferred Plastic Guide is, first of all, as I mentioned, it's in the spirit of developing tools to help guide decision-making. And the kinds of decisions or questions that members have been asking is, what plastics should they use or minimize or avoid? What about alternative materials? how do you make a decision when there's a number of key considerations at play? So the preferred plastic guide was proposed, and it was inspired by some work undertaken by Tesco in the UK over the past several years. It's not dissimilar to work that other firms have undertaken to help, again, in that decision making with respect to materials and plastics. The challenge for making a packaging related decision is that you're weighing various factors at the same time. You want to ensure food quality. You need to increase or help support sort of increased food choice for consumers and customers. You want to obviously sustain that food availability over the year. You want to minimize food waste. You want to obviously keep cost affordable for consumers, and all the while trying to mitigate impacts on the environment. So the challenge is that if it was one criteria, the decision would be relatively simple. But because of the various set of criteria that come into a packaging decision, the thought was that the preferred plastics guide would help in trying to consider those various dimensions. So the guide was developed to identify, again, three categories: the preferred, the minimize, and the unfavorable. Mm-hmm. And this is based on considerable input from industry members through surveys that were undertaken in the summer of 2019 as part of the working group efforts, ongoing consultation with the plastics working group and the subgroup members, as well as engagement with other key stakeholders such as the packaging industry and the recycling stakeholders. And it's the first tool that will help provide some guiding information to members in terms of plastics that are preferred because there are high levels of recycling available. Again, this is a national question. The challenge, again, with this kind of work is that recycling is not standardized across the country. So what is highly recycled in one area may not be so much in the other. Yeah. But the point is the following, that there are materials that are not recyclable at all. And that makes them unfavorable, although they may be very good from a food quality point of view, or as good as others. They are not recyclable, therefore not as favorable. Mm-hmm. There are materials that can be recycled, or maybe not as recycled as they could be yet, or they're being phased out. So that's sort of the middle ground. The materials that you want to minimize because they provide a lot of the benefits of packaging, but maybe they're just not going in the right direction in terms of being recycled or having a smaller environmental footprint. The materials that are under the preferred category are those that satisfy a lot of the criteria, like ensuring food quality and so on, and minimizing food waste, but are either very highly recycled or creating the conditions for, let's say, migrating towards a circular economy, for example. Mm-hmm. So the distinction, what the plastic guide provides is some guidance in terms of the distinction between those various plastics and why some would be more favorable or more preferred than others.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's really interesting because it seems like, one of the key factors in this whole equation goes back to infrastructure and recyclability, and the challenge between, different regions, different jurisdictions. Just flipping through it, polypropylene, is in that minimized category because, the recyclability really depends on jurisdiction.
Yeah. And it's a good example, again, where the minimized column is reflects both materials that are sort of on their way out, as well as materials that are just not there yet. Mm-hmm. Polypropylene is an example of one which is currently minimized because of the limited amount of recycling capacity available, but definitely has the recyclability where it could be seen as a preferred material once the recycling capacity is available in a certain region.
Right. Yeah. So getting to the conversation on sustainable packaging generally, where does the preferred plastics guide fit into that conversation?
So I think I would start with making the point that sustainable packaging is about selecting packaging that, again, considers the various criteria that I've outlined. In other words, sustainable packaging is packaging that ensures food quality and sustains food availability and minimizes food waste and manages costs to consumers while also mitigating the impacts on the environment. So the criteria for sustainable packaging needs to be a set of criteria that accounts for all of those. Is packaging sustainable if it significantly increases food waste during transit?
Mm-hmm.
Is it sustainable if it adversely impacts food quality? Or is it sustainable if it adversely impacts the cost to consumers, such that they start making poor food choices? So sustainable is about balance. It's about recognizing that environmental impact has to be mitigated while recognizing that you need to meet those others. And that's recognizing in this case that sustainable packaging supports ongoing efforts to move towards increased recyclability. It helps to drive towards investments in the supporting infrastructure. And more so, sustainable also creates the conditions for increasing use of plastics-based circular economy.
Mm-hmm. So, and so I did see that as well. Within the preferred category includes plastics that incorporate post-consumer recycled content, or PCR.
Right. So the idea is that you have materials that can incorporate post-consumer recycled content more readily than others. So a sustainable material or sustainable packaging choice is one that recognizes that it's recyclable today, but it may also be circular enabling tomorrow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's a more informed and more sort of sustainable choice. The last point I'd like to make on the sustainable packaging is needs to be recognition that this is about a full life cycle impact assessment. That ultimately a sustainable choice is one which, when you take the entirety of the life cycle of this material and this packaging application, that it minimizes that overall impact on the environment. And this is something that the industry recognizes, but admittedly is a challenging thing to do, given the various factors at play. So in other words, when it's a single trade-off, let's say around food quality, so this packaging is better than that packaging, is a simpler assessment than when you look at it overall and need to take into account things like food waste and simultaneously environmental impact, that a sustainable choice is the one that minimizes that full life cycle impact on the environment, either through waste of food, waste of the packaging, so that you have effectively the minimum impact on the environment. And that's a challenging decision for members to make because those various factors are at play.
Definitely.
So the hope is that the tools that will be developed as part of the strategy work will help to make more informed decisions.
Right. Because there are so many variables there
at play. Exactly.
Yeah. So switching gears, talking a little bit more about COVID-19, there are mixed messages, in the market right now around plastics. 3 months ago, we were focused on reducing. Now with the pandemic, there seems to be greater consumer demand in some cases. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think what it reveals again is the packaging serves multiple purposes. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm repeating this for emphasis. The packaging is critical to ensure food quality, food safety, and enable broader food choices and minimize food waste and mitigate cost. And so when issues like COVID arise, people's focus moves from, let's call it the singular issue at the time, which was the environmental concern, to some of the other issues, which were always there, but suddenly become more front of mind. So food safety as an example. So I think what we've seen is consumers becoming more aware of not only the convenience necessarily, but the implied and effective safety that prepackaged foods would have when a consumer goes into a store and buys produce and has a choice between produce that it's open air or produce that has been prepackaged. And so I think that is, again, it's consumer behavior demonstrating that is also an important criteria. So I think it's not displacing, in my view, the importance of the environmental or minimizing the environmental impact of plastics. It's about that balancing act. And I think if COVID has revealed anything, is that consumers, when well informed, understand that packaging plays or achieves multiple goals. As I like to say, sound packaging threads the needle between those various requirements.
Yeah.
So the consumer sees the food quality, it sees the minimized food waste, and it sees the mitigated impacts on the environment.
Yeah. And that's going back to our research from last summer with the working group that Abacus did. And there's a great episode that David Coletto joined in the fall with some of those insights for our listeners, if you want to go back and listen to that. So before we wrap up, I mean, again, going back to the conversation about sustainable packaging, not just plastics, plastic substitutes and alternative materials. Right. So why aren't we just simply moving everything to alternative materials? And, what are the barriers to some of those other alternatives?
No, it's an excellent question, because I think ultimately this is one of the reasons the first tool we developed was a preferred plastics guide and not a preferred materials guide. Because when looking at plastics, the fundamental question in regards to its environmental impact hinges around recyclability. So the question when looking at plastics is, it's preferred because of the high likelihood that it will be recycled as a material versus not and end up in a landfill. When you look at alternative materials, recycling is not necessarily the path once it's been used. It's not the disposal path. It ends up taking alternative paths such as composting, or goes to landfill for long-term degradation, assuming the conditions are suitable for the degradation of those materials over time. And that's what makes alternative material choices, again, a little different. And again, they need to be informed, those decisions, by other sources of information. In other words, what is the state of composting capacity in a city? What are the conditions for composting in someone's backyard? This is something which Canada struggles with, because Canada's climate does not support at-home composting conditions in such a way that you could see packaging being composted at home year-round.
Yeah, it's simply not hot enough?
Well, if you live in Arizona, it'd be different if you look at the average temperature versus Canada. So the challenge is one that composting is a viable alternative. But again, you have to look at it in terms of where are the conditions to enable it. And what's important with packaging, like a lot of other issues like this, is one of scale. So it's one thing if you're talking about a small volume of material, but when you talk about produce packaging, you're talking about very large volumes of packaging being used by a very large number of consumers across the country. And so there has to be availability of that material. This is where some alternative materials have been presented as being very appealing, but they can't be scaled. In other words, if you wanted to buy, 10,000 units or 100,000 units, that material may not be readily available today. And then if you could, the issue is, would there be the composting capacity to take on that volume of material and actually break it down? So those are the things you have to look at. And so that's where one of the other tools that we're going to be developing is a material selector, which will help members understand those various dimensions, and then again, be able to make informed decisions that recognize that when it comes to alternative materials, things like composting capacity, and again, I mentioned it earlier, the full life cycle cost of alternative materials also needs to be taken into account. When materials are sourced from alternative, let's say, renewable sources, there is still an energy cost in that cultivation and processing that needs to come into account. And it's not saying that it's necessarily better or worse. In my view, it's different. And it's different than plastics And plastics comes with, again, that full life cycle cost. So what we hope to do with subsequent tools like the material selector is to help members be able to make those decisions when you're really kind of comparing, no pun intended, apples and oranges between materials. And I think that's something that the working group has been really helpful in revealing that's the challenge behind some of these decisions, is that they're apple and oranges decisions. Choosing between plastics is simpler, is easier because you're comparing apples to apples.
So CPMA will be releasing a material selector guide later in 2020.
Yeah, to
support our members, in assessing those options between plastics and alternative materials. Exactly. Great.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dan. It was great to have you on, and I think this really helps set the stage for the guests to come.
Well, thank you.
On the line now is another Ian Gordon, Senior Vice President of Loblaw Brands. Welcome.
Thanks, Ian. Nice to be here today.
Can you start off by letting our listeners know about your role within Loblaw's and about the Loblaw's Plastics Steering Committee?
That'd be great. Love to. I have the pleasure of leading the Loblaw Brands Group team, which develops and builds 4 of Canada's largest brands: President's Choice, No Name, Farmers Market, and Life Brand. And one thing that's unique, and I think puts us in a great position to be able to talk about plastics and the plastic initiatives, is if you look at the market share of Loblaw's, which is approximately 30% in the Canadian market, and you look at the penetration of our control brand within that market share, that's another 30%. So for all intents and purposes, we are responsible for about 10% of the plastic waste in Canada. So I think we're really well positioned to understand the issue and even better positioned to help provide a solution. If you recall the Consumer Goods Forum, Galen Weston is on the Consumer Goods Forum. It's a consortium of the largest consumer packaged goods and retailers around the world, and they meet once a year and talk about industry issues and solutions. Last year, the Consumer Goods Forum met in Vancouver, and Galen, as the host, was the keynote speaker. And one of the things he talked about, and this was obviously pre-COVID, but the news at the time was about the challenges we are facing from an environmental perspective on single-use plastics. And as an industry, Galen pointed out the obvious, which is we are one of the major contributors to this. And as a result, we can be one of the key architects to the solution. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 strategies that he thought moving forward. One is, how do we develop a better collection system so that we can increase the amount of recoverable plastics in the system, which currently is estimated to be approximately 10%. And what can we do with the system to get that number up to 40, 50, 60, or even 70%? So that's the external piece. And then internally, it's great to have a theory about what's right and what the right thing to do is. And when we look at, there's lots of organizations out there like Ellen MacArthur Foundation who really, they have some great knowledge and information about the way to get at this. But what we're trying to do is find a very specific action plan to take that theory and actually start to make it work. And so within Loblaw's, I'm heading up the Plastic Action Committee, and we are really challenged with how do we reduce the negative impact of plastics on the environment. And as I stated previously, when we're responsible for 10% of the plastic being produced, we can actually be responsible for that solution. So I'm heading up that steering group within Loblaw's, where we're looking across the business and not just within the control brand portfolio of how we improve our plastic usage, but how do we communicate with the vendors that come and see us about what we're looking for in the future in terms of plastic and plastic consumption.
Really interesting approach, really interesting stuff. So if I'm a vendor looking to sell in the Canadian market, what are the big things that I should be aware of when it comes to packaging now and in the years to come?
Well, I think that's one thing that I'm really enjoying about this plastic steering committee is up until now, it's really been up to the vendor's choice. What kind of equipment do I have? What have I produced in the past, without a lot of foresight into what should I be doing in the future to make the system any better. And so our responsibility, over the course of the next sort of 60 to 90 days, I think we will be in a better position to come out to the vendor community and say, here's some recommendations we're making. And I can tell you right now what's on the table are simple recommendations so that we can get some success initially, but we will start to publish requirements for what are preferential types of plastic packaging that we would like you to use, with the ultimate goal of how do we get to reusable, recyclable, and reduction of plastic. I think the industry, a lot of vendors right now, and a lot of CPG companies, a lot of retailers are starting to talk about what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. But what we need is a voluntary alignment within the industry that, for instance, we're going to eliminate all black plastics in the system because we know that the optical sorters at the municipal recycling facilities can't detect it. So what are we doing in that area? And we will come with some very specific recommendations to say this, for instance, if you're going to use PET, we want you to use translucent blue or green PET. We don't want any more opaque PET because we know the presence of opaque PET contaminates the recycling stream and makes the recycled PET less valuable and less usable down the road. I didn't really answer your question, but to really answer your question, I think what vendors can do is really make sure they're talking to their customers and getting their feedback about what we're looking for. And, specifically, an action we took last year was our mushroom tills are black and they're virgin plastic. And so there's two strikes against it right there. And we said, what can we do to get rid of the black plastic? And what can we do to get more post-consumer recycled content into that mushroom till? And after some work with our vendors, we came with a caramel colored, so the optical sorters can pick it up, and a 75% post-consumer recycled plastic mushroom till. And why I think this is so powerful is we were working with our vendors, and pretty soon everybody in the marketplace that those vendors service were using the same thing. So you think about the number of plastic mushroom tills that were being diverted to landfill are now being able to move into the recycling stream and be part of
into the circular economy.
Part of the circular economy, increasing that to 10% collection rate, and actually getting some more post-consumer recycled plastic into the system so that post-consumer recycled plastic is not more expensive than virgin plastic.
It's really interesting stuff, and it's a very collaborative approach with vendors, and it sounds like it's quite in line with the work that we're doing with our membership in terms of a preferred plastics guide, helping industry and working with industry to identify those plastics across the board that are it's like a green light, yellow light, red light. This one's good. Let's keep pushing this. Let's consider minimizing those in the yellow category and shift away from those in the red. So it's really interesting. Everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get some agreement as to where we should be converging.
Definitely. And so before we wrap up, talking about alternative packaging solutions, talking about compostable or any other means, what are your thoughts on, where that's at and any other barriers to some of those alternative solutions?
I think, our focus right now is on making packaging reusable, reducing packaging, and improving the value of the recycling stream. When it comes to compostable, I think there are some challenges in compostable. Number one is there is no definition of compostable packaging. It can be biodegradable, it can be oxo-degradable, it can be oxo-biodegradable. And the challenge is when the consumer can't differentiate between PET, a petroleum-based PET, or a plant-based plastic that look very similar, we know that our recycling system is really complicated now. So the more plant-based plastic, or what people traditionally call compostable plastic, we introduce into the system, it has the potential, if you put plant-based plastic in with petroleum-based PET, it contaminates the recycling stream. And we're actually working in the opposite direction. We're not increasing the value of the recycling stream, we're actually decreasing the value of the recycling stream. Conversely, if you put that petroleum-based PET plastic into the composting stream, that contaminates that, and it's not going to compost. So I think based on where we are today, the facilities that we have are just not set up for plant-based plastics or compostable plastics. Now, in 10 years, things might be different, but right now, they act more as a challenge to the system than a solution for the system. And I think I will give one exception to that, and that's one that I'm really looking for right now, very specific to the produce industry, is someone came to me with a problem that said, I have all this produce that I can put in the composter, but it has plastic PLU stickers on it, and that will screw up my composting. And so I think there is value, and a lot of value in finding a solution for a compostable PLU sticker that remains with the produce for that very reason. Where I don't feel there is a solution, when we look at traditional petroleum-based plastic packaging like PET, substituting plant-based plastic for that, and thereby contaminating the recycling stream.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a challenge, for the industry, and one that we're all working on.
And the problem is, the solutions that seem so obvious are anything but. And that's the challenge with this whole problem, is the solution's complicated. And the more various people that keep trying to solve it complicates it even further. And that's why when I talk about the Consumer Goods Forum and the multinationals and the CPGs, I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to force, and this is a little bit less for you guys, but in general, plastic packaging, we're not going to tell the United States, the CPG companies that compete in North America, that you have to use this type of plastic packaging in Canada, because they're going to laugh at us. I used to work down there. They couldn't even figure out why we did things for Canada. You're smaller than California. Why would we do that? Right. So what I love about what CGF is doing, they've got the CEO of Coke, Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, Unilever. They're all buying into this at a global level. And so as they align globally, think about how that can drive things in North America. And with the retailers pushing and with the vendors, with those core big vendors pushing, you're going to get a lot of momentum going on this. That's what's exciting about it.
For sure. And and the consumers are pushing it too, right? So.
True. Problem is, the consumers can't even figure out the simple what goes in their blue bin.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure
there's a consumer education. There's definitely a consumer education piece there as well.
I can tell you that I would lay money on the table that 95% of consumers have no clue what the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 means. And they certainly, if they did know what it meant, know which of those numbers actually goes into their blue bin.
Number one is good, is basically what I.
Well, number one's PET.
Yeah, that's in the green light on the CPMA preferred plastics list. So. Yep.
And moving forward, our recommendation is that continues to be a green light, which is great.
For sure. And anything that, and this goes back to your first point, anything that can be, going back to that circular economy, and certainly an interesting challenge, and certainly a complex one. So,
well, if ever you want to see a successful circular economy, if you look at President's Choice single-serve water bottles, so they're vilified all over the place, right? If you ever want to vilify plastic, show a single-serve water bottle. Our vendor, Ice River Springs, actually collects all of the translucent or transparent PET coming out of the Toronto Blue Bin program. They take it up, they grind it, they turn it back into food safe PET flakes.
Yeah.
They blow their own molds, they blow the bottle, they fill it with water, and they ship it back down to us. So every one of their bottles is 100% post-consumer recycled plastic.
And so we actually had Ice River Springs on the show back in the fall.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, when we were talking about plastics. So to any listeners listening right now, certainly go back to that one. The Practicality of Plastics is the name of that episode. And so in addition to that, from a retail perspective, from a large retail perspective, what are the remaining challenges and risks when it comes to plastics? And what more can our industry do collectively, to meet sustainability needs, to meet business needs, and to meet consumer needs?
First, start doing more of what we're doing right now, which is communicating and not trying to do everything individually. So actually collaborating, communicating, and converging on common goals and aligned goals. And I think the second piece is not trying to boil the ocean, which is what are the things that we can do right now? What are the things we can do in 6 to 12 months? And what are the things we should be planning to do in 2 to 3 years? How do we deal with PVC and flexible PVC? How do we get alignment? I mean, I think one of the most incredible things we've done in the last 8 years is there was a time when clamshells from produce were not accepted in the blue bin because they were made from a number of different substrates and plastics. And as an industry, all of a sudden, everybody aligned to say, let's use this one substrate. And as a result, we were able to get all of those clamshells that were going into landfill into the recycling stream in the blue box. The second piece we can do, and I think this is critically important too, and it's part of the external strategy, is, we know there are 240 different blue box programs in Ontario alone, and we know they're all different. And so as we move to extended producer responsibility and we as an industry start to manage stewardship and those programs, we can start to shape that program to get alignment on the types of plastics we're going to support and make that recycling stream more valuable through the Blue Box program.
For sure. There'll definitely be a stronger voice, collectively.
But we also have skin in the game. And not to denigrate Stewardship Ontario, but as the producers, we all want to drive the lowest cost to the consumer. And so we're going to try to make the system as efficient as possible.
All right. Well, listen, Ian, thank you so much. Really great insight and great perspective. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, and have a great day and stay safe.
Let's take a quick break with a word from our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms.
Hi, it's Ray here from Nature Fresh Farms. Our management team and staff are committed towards greater sustainability goals in our farming operations and identifying better alternatives for consumer packages. By working with our industry partners and listening to our consumers, we look for avenues to find greater sustainability in all aspects of our operation. For more information on our sustainable journey, as well as how to recycle tips, visit us at naturefresh.ca.
Next up on the show, we have Emily Murracas, Director of Marketing, and Fernanda Albuquerque, Packaging Development Manager at Mucci Farms. Welcome, Emily and Fernanda.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian.
So first off, before we get into it, congratulations to Mucci Farms for taking home one of the 2020 CPMA New Product Showcase Awards, the Packaging Innovation category with your 100% recyclable paper top seal.
Yes, thank you, Ian. We were really glad that CPMA offered this virtual platform and that we were still able to showcase our new products and our efforts towards innovation as it relates to new packaging. And of course, to actually win was very exciting and most rewarding for our team.
Yeah, no, it was great to see all the online engagement with all of our members that participated. And, it's certainly very, very timely for this episode on sustainable packaging. So this interview, I'm really interested to hear your perspective, as a grower, as a shipper on packaging. And so when you hear that term sustainable packaging, what does that mean for Mucci Farms?
Well, sustainability is a big word, and it holds a lot of weight these days in our industry. And it's always been top of mind for Mucci Farms, long before it was a buzzword in the industry, actually. When you consider greenhouse farming, for example, it's one of the most sustainable, efficient, and safest farming methods out there. Everything from our sourcing to our growing practices. So as sustainability relates to packaging, we put the same value and emphasis on the full life cycle of the package, and we seriously consider its long-term effect on the environment. For instance, recyclability in packaging has always been a top priority for us, and we use most of our current packaging is recyclable and made from recycled content. Of course, with the recent focus and the environmental pressures on the use of plastics, we've had to really look at ways of reducing our use of plastics. Not necessarily saying that we're going to be eliminating them, as we feel in some cases we can't avoid using plastics. However, using more environmentally friendly plastics. And I would also say, because we consider ourselves leaders in the industry, we feel it's important for us to continue to inspire and educate our retail partners and consumers on the materials that we're using. We want our retail partners and our consumers alike to feel comfortable, and we want them to want to align with a brand that values sustainable business practices, not just as it relates to environmental sustainability, but inclusively like social and economic sustainability as well.
Right.
So
right.
We continue to invest in R&D as it relates to packaging, and we're always seeking alternatives.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's really interesting using the recyclable paper top seal as an example. It incorporates that plastic, but it's almost, I imagine, looking for other alternatives, other solutions. How did that innovation come about?
Well, we're always keeping our eyes and ears peeled to new innovation within and outside of our industry. We first came across the paper top seal in Holland during a seed trial tour, and again in Germany at the Fruit Logistica trade show. Of course, we initially had some reservations and questions about the use of it, such as we were concerned with product visibility. Was product visibility going to be a concern? And then we quickly decided it didn't matter so much anymore. We considered the fact that the tray itself was clear, and not to mention that we are fortunate to have a world-class designer in-house that's able to create incredible eye-catching and enticing graphics. And we also saw that as an opportunity to use the extra real estate to educate the consumers on the packaging. Other questions that were raised was, could this work for large-scale production? Could we accomplish this with our current equipment and the tooling that we had? Mm-hmm. Will it seal properly? Will the quality be compromised when traveling? Of course, these are all the questions that we asked during product development. And we were reassured because we had already invested heavily on top seal equipment in our warehouses, and all the existing Pro Seal equipment will be used to execute this package. So there was no real need for major equipment purchases, which was a bonus. And again, we're working with our partners at Pro Seal and our paper manufacturer to roll out a more large-scale production.
Have you felt, or have you, noticed that this paper packaging, has met consumer needs in some ways?
Mm-hmm. The initial perception has been positive. We'll be conducting a more formal soft trial launch with a local retailer, along with conducting a targeted marketing campaign that'll include an actual consumer survey. So it'll be a little bit more interesting to get more feedback when we actually complete that. But we believe that although there's been a lot of developments with the reduction of plastic with the use of top seal in general, we still need to ensure that the film that companies are using is recyclable and not laminated, resulting in not being easily separated and recycled. So it could actually contaminate the recycle stream. So we find that with the use of paper top seal, it eliminates that confusion, and it'll allow for the component to be recycled, like the paper and the tray separately. So it's an easy resolution for the end user, and it reduces the plastic use. So
right.
We see a lot of benefits there.
So flipping things over to you, Fernanda, talking about plastics, as much as, consumers want to see a shift away from plastic, from our work with the Plastics Packaging Working Group and some of the research we've been doing, we know that there's so much that plastic does in terms of shelf life and food safety, preventing bruising, things like that. From a grower shipper perspective, do Do you still see a role for plastics now and into the future?
I think there will always be a need for plastics in the produce industry for that reason, for maintaining the quality, for food safety, for shelf life, for food waste reduction, and for product visibility. I think that there's trends for people to start using, materials that are made from cardboard or fibers. I don't know how sustainable fiber is going to be in the end. PET material can be, recycled over and over again. And I know that fiber material, the fibers tend to get smaller and smaller, and you can only recycle them up to a certain point. So I think plastics are still going to be, a priority. The thing is, we need to make sure that they're recyclable and that there's an infrastructure in place to recycle them. We've seen firsthand what happens when a change in circumstance disrupts the perception towards plastics. What I'm talking about is to note the recent events of the COVID-19 pandemic. The needs of consumers changed, and the focus became the safety of the food supply. Mm-hmm. And how do you ensure the safety of the food supply? You package the product.
Yeah, that's one thing that we talked about earlier is, it's almost a shift in consumer demand all of a sudden, being very proactive about reducing plastics and, talk of a single-use plastics ban, which, accelerates how our industry needs to adapt. But then, of course, with the pandemic, there's been this real shift towards plastics for sure.
It's true, and with all the fears with cross-contamination, it brought on a heightened demand for packaged produce. But regardless of all this, we still can't get complacent. We still need to continue to push for governments and municipalities to build the infrastructure to deal with the ever-changing landscape of packaging on the environment.
For sure. And that kind of leads into my next question, talking about the remaining challenges for your company and the produce community at large when it comes to plastics. Certainly infrastructure is one that I've seen pop up. Do you want to expand on that and maybe if there are any other remaining challenges that you foresee?
As you can imagine, Ian, we are a large company with multiple locations and partners. The challenge is to find an alternative material that can support the foundation that we have already put in place to ensure that it works with existing equipment at all our locations. There may be new materials out there that might be viable replacements, but what is challenging is making sure that they're not more costly to produce, that we are able to bring these to our customers and to our consumers, and that the cost is going to be cost neutral. And the new equipment to run a lot of these new packaging alternatives, may require a really large investment. And for us, it's an exponential investment because of all our locations, we would have to duplicate lines at different locations that may pack the same thing. So it's not to say that it can't be done, but if we can find a material that works with our existing equipment, then it's a win for us and for all our partners, because then we're able to stabilize our costs. And then I just want to reiterate about infrastructure. I can't stress enough that we need help from our municipalities and governments to put in place recycling facilities or industrial digesters, and to put dollars into research and development to recycle the plastics that are being put into our landfills. And of course, consumer education on how to properly dispose of the package. And then another piece too is there's a lot of talk about PCR content or recycled content in PET material. Mm-hmm. It's been widely discussed as a sustainable solution, but there aren't enough recycling facilities or post-consumer recycled material stock available to supply the whole industry. So is it realistic to think that we can have all of the PET be PCR content? That goal, would be great to strive for. But until, our governments can put more money into the infrastructure to be able to help people who want to help the environment, put up these facilities that can do more recycling, it would be such an awesome thing to have these facilities all over North America that, could do recycling.
Mm-hmm. So switching gears to some alternative packaging solutions, maybe talking a little bit more about compostable. Are there any other conditions or considerations for those alternative forms of packaging to be a more viable option?
I think compostable packaging is a good option, but like plastics, there still needs to be a process for the material to be composted. There's still a lack of infrastructure to compost as well. Municipalities need to have industrial digesters. And yes, some have the availability of an industrial digester, but then not every municipality does. So everywhere we ship produce to doesn't mean that municipality is going to have an industrial digester to be able to compost a compostable package. So we end up having the same problem. So you might expect an outcome because you think you're doing something better for the environment, but it's going to be equally unpredictable as the compostable alternative material may end up in the landfill. And in the end, you're not doing any better for the environment. I mean, there's other trends. There's other, materials out there that there's been some, there's a supply of, sometimes minimal supply. And then there's also that consumer education piece where they think, a biodegradable product is going to be better, a renewable resource product is going to be better. But that's not always the case. And what happens in these cases as well is these alternative packagings actually cost us more money. So we're not going to be able to, supply you your, container of tomatoes at the same price if now we're having to put, a PLA container onto the market, for example. And so these packaging innovations, for renewable resources as well, we have found instances that there's a lack of supply. And until a producer can stabilize the supply versus the demand, it would be a risky undertaking for us.
And the costs, because the cost still remains high.
Exactly. And sorry, there isn't enough supply for the whole of our industry. So, in my opinion.
Well, just going back to that point about consumers, that was part of some of the research that came out of the plastics packaging working group in the summer was, the consumer is definitely reasonable, in balancing those needs as a consumer and as a citizen. So it's a conflict that I think a lot of consumers struggle with. But I think there is, at least to some degree, some awareness amongst consumers. So.
And I think too that, as a company, we felt strongly to do our part. And one of the outcomes was we felt that it was necessary to join the CPMA Plastics Committee to help advocate for the produce industry. Because we all know that, this is an industry-wide concern, and we need to work collectively. So there's been a lot of positive, information that's been shared through the Plastics Committee, and a lot of efforts to get these needs that are necessary with infrastructure and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's always more work to come too. And we're at the stage now where it's about, starting to develop tools and resources for the sector and for everyone across the supply chain.
Because we all come across these same challenges, right? So
exactly.
Definitely. So thank you so much, Emily and Fernanda, for joining the podcast and sharing your insights from the grower shipper side. Really great to have you on.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
Thanks. And our next guest is Scott Howarth from Sinclair. Scott, can you start off by telling our listeners about Sinclair and your role there?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Sinclair, to start with, manufactures labels and high-speed labeling equipment for fresh produce. We have 10 manufacturing locations servicing all the main growing regions around the world. And I've been with Sinclair for over 26 years now. I direct global research and development. And one of the things that I love about Sinclair and the fresh produce industry is how great the people are all around the world. They really have a passion for their products and are always quick to share their experiences with me. So it's really a great industry to be in.
Providing produce labeling solutions, I think fits into our discussion around sustainable packaging. We're talking about packaging. It's not just the clamshell. It's not just the packaging that surrounds the produce. We're also talking about labeling as well. So when we're talking about sustainable packaging, what does that mean to you and to Sinclair?
Wow. What a timely question, right? Especially in the days that we're in with this COVID-19.
Yeah.
Sustainable packaging, to me is the definition is continually evolving. And if you'd asked me this, a few months ago, or even say a year ago, or even 10 years ago, I'm sure my answer would be framed a little bit differently. But at least today, as we look at this, I think sustainable packaging, it's really an engineered packaging solution. It's got to be safe, functional. It's got to come from reliable supply chain, and maybe not last, and maybe not most important, but it's got to be cost effective. Mm-hmm. If you dive into each of these characteristics, you start to see how each play a part to ensure that the people, the packaged product, and our environment, they all must be protected.
Yeah, no, we talked about it earlier. It's a complex conversation because there's so many variables at play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what good is a package if the product is damaged during transport, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you really have to consider all these, the big picture. And I think, one of the things that I think of is that you just have to consider not just the materials, where they come from, but also end of life for the packaging material too.
Right. So from your perspective, talking about labeling, what are the biggest challenges and hurdles with plastic labeling, with plastic packaging, and other labeling alternatives?
Yeah. Well, I think for us, one of our biggest challenges, and this is no matter what type of materials we're using, when we're thinking about developing something, we are always balancing global food safety regulations, because we're applying this to fresh produce, with the functional requirements. Things like getting it applied to a piece of fruit at very high speeds. Mm-hmm. And in adhering to all different types of produce, from kiwi fruit, potatoes, you name it. The surface conditions of that fruit is very different. All the different produce that you can start to think of. As well, it's applying them in all different types of environmental conditions. One of the most important things that we're trying to do is really get that labeled piece of fruit through the supply chain, from when it's applied to the produce in the packing house all the way to point of sale. So, those are some basic requirements.
Yeah. And so, talking about compostable labeling, and when we're talking about labeling, we're talking about PLU stickers. We understand that various European countries and in the EU general has become focused on PLU stickers, specifically the capacity for stickers to be compostable. In Canada, we've seen a couple articles and comments around the same topic, around the same issue. Can you give us a quick overview of what is happening and how industry is working to address compostability of PLU stickers?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the EU has passed legislation, as well. A number of member states within the EU have also passed their own legislation. All this is focusing on minimizing packaging waste, specifically plastics. France, for example, passed legislation that comes into effect January the 1st, 2022, banning fresh produce stickers unless they are home compostable and contain some level of bio-based content. Flanders, another region in Europe, passed legislation due to come into force a year earlier, January 1st, 2021. Also banning produce stickers unless they are home compostable or are deemed essential. Unfortunately, there's been no really official definition published to describe essential.
Right.
Yeah.
So the challenge is, somebody's got to set those standards.
Exactly. But some of what we're doing to drive for clarity is Freshfield Europe, which is the European Fresh Produce Association, along with produce industry partners, including ourselves. We're working hard to educate and lobby for more common sense regulation.
Sure.
Within the produce industry.
So from the labeling side, again, are there any unique or specific considerations when it comes to packaging?
Well, like I mentioned before, the biggest thing is trying to get that product through the supply chain. And I mentioned a few of them, but the produce is really unique. Its clock is ticking, right? From the moment it's harvested, the clock is on, and so it's so important. So one of the big challenges that we're faced with is when we're getting the labels on, we got to make sure our equipment is up to the task. It's got to work right then and there. Otherwise, if a piece of equipment goes down and we say, hey, we'll get there in a week or two, that's not going to cut it. We got to be there right away to get that up and running. So the time factor is so important. And we, I mentioned also the whole, supply chain. It's just so important that material make it through the supply chain. There's, a cold chain that got the adhesives. They've got to stick in this cold environment and moist environment all the way through. So I think those are some of those key things that are a little unique versus some other applications.
Yeah, and especially when we're talking about recyclability. I've read a little bit that adhesives may inadvertently contaminate recycling streams. So we certainly encourage all of our members to discuss options and to consider all these factors to minimize those adverse impacts.
Yeah, I think as you talk about that, you started talking a little bit about the challenges with compostable materials, especially home composting, right? And you mentioned in Canada, it's a very different environment, right? Mm-hmm. So very different from my backyard. I'm sure you don't hit 120 degrees in the middle of the summer, right?
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So it's very, very, these different environments around the world, which really leads to, having good standards in place. And that's one of the big challenges that we see as well. You got to have these good standards in place so that we can, really develop to them. But I'd also caution one set of solutions like home composting is the way to go. No, there's a variety. And we get to, you started talking a little bit about the recycling side of things. That's kind of that next layer where I think plastics still offer a really good option if we put in place the infrastructure to recycle them.
Right, definitely. Looking ahead, what do you foresee as some of the major considerations, innovations, risks down the road, when it comes to plastics and when it comes to labeling?
Yeah. So again, I believe plastics, are a class of materials that used in packaging that at one time, they were actually seen as very sustainable. They have properties providing strength so that the packaging can be reduced. It offers a safe barrier, which helps to increase the life of produce and promote food safety, which is very important in this time. So I think the consideration or the risk is really making sure that we're able to educate and create this infrastructure so that these plastics can be recycled.
Right.
Yeah. One of the points I wanted to make was labels. You mentioned about the adhesives. Their labels are really considered a contaminant in the recycling stream. This is generally due to the adhesives. So I think there needs to be some investigation. How do we create recycling programs that might facilitate or allow for these products to be recycled as well? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the things that I think are could be done is let's look at other avenues for, say, produce labels like industrial composting or something like that. That might be a better way versus, say, home composting, say, in like Canada. It may be better to send it to an industrial composting where they can control the environment and have these products break down.
Right.
Yeah. The other risk that comes immediately to mind are really government regulations that really do not align with the current infrastructure or material availability. And that's some of what's going on in Europe, and where we're really working with that, Freshfield Europe to try to do something more common sense so that it gives manufacturers like ourselves and the industry to develop these type of products. They take time, right. A lot of time.
Well, yeah. So it certainly sounds like, it's an interesting and evolving space, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is evolving. And I will say that when we first got into creating products that really would meet that could be compostable, there were no standards. Now there are industrial composting standards that you can go by. Home composting, they're getting there, but they're not quite in place. There's only one or two that I'm aware of. But some of the challenges that we faced then there just weren't very many players in industry developing products. Mm-hmm. Now those players are there, and they're really starting to ramp up their R&D and their innovation. So there's, I would say some hope.
Well, it's definitely one to keep an eye on for sure.
Absolutely.
Listen, Scott, thanks so much for joining, and enjoy. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me.
All right, sure thing. Thanks again to all of our guests for joining this episode. To our members, stay tuned for the release of our preferred plastics guide. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, continue to seek out new knowledge, and basically never stop growing.